Welcome to Carbon Politics, a CSE podcast series decoding the politics of climate change from the lens of the Global South. In this series, we will explore multiple critical questions that are surrounding and pressuring the climate debate today. What happens next on multilateralism, or where is the current trade system going? And how does the global financial architecture need to be reformed? How are these systems influencing the ability of developing countries to address, respond to, and adapt to climate change? These are some of the critical questions we hope to answer, and we hope you join us on this journey this year. Hello everyone, welcome to Carbon Politics, a new podcast series by the Center for Science and Environment. I am Avantika Goswami from the Climate Change Program at CSE.
I am Trishant from the Climate Change Program at the Center for Science and Environment.
So we are excited to present the first episode of this series that will be a monthly series that we hope to carry on this year and in the years to come. So why do we need another podcast, honestly, in this landscape of many, many podcasts? Well, there is a conversation that is brewing in multiple spaces around the world that we think needs to really be centered. How does the developing world cope with climate change? How does it respond to the need to address climate change in this very turbulent geopolitical landscape? And what are the tools and resources available to developing countries to actually navigate this challenge? So we want to try to center that issue on Global South countries and their very specific context in the whole global climate change debate. So that's the purpose of really starting this conversation series. CSE has been embedded in this discussion since the beginning. I think since when climate diplomacy became a thing with the 1992 Rio Convention, where Anil Agarwal, almost 35 years ago, Anil Agarwal, Sunita Narayan, Anumita Roy Chaudhary, all from CSE were at Rio at the first Earth Summit, which precipitated the historic UNFCCC. And it was such a unique moment that I think many of us feel has not been seen ever since then. Yeah. Maybe there have been some wins, some successes, but Rio was such a unique moment. I want to actually kick off with a quick an insight from this paper that Sunita Narayan and Anil Agarwal wrote in 1991 called Global Warming in an Unequal World, a paper that is being cited even today. Behind the global rules and the global discipline that is being thrust upon the hapless third world, as it was called then, there is precious little global sharing or even an effort by the West to understand the perspectives of the other two-thirds. How can we visualize any kind of global management in a world so highly divided between the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, which does not have a basic element of economic justice and equity? And this is just one excerpt from what is a seminal paper, but it holds true even today in this very, very turbulent world. So today, many of the old debates are still raging. What do developing countries prioritize, development or climate action? And for countries of the global north, in the climate diplomacy space, the focus has always been climate action. Mitigation has been the top priority. But this demand has been placed without stopping luxury emissions in the global north, while continuing to, wag a finger almost at the global south that's being told off for not stopping its survival emissions. But new debates are also emerging. For example, is climate even on the agenda this year? Or is it energy security, economic and trade competitiveness, favorable and unfavorable geopolitical alliances? Is it true that, yes, it's true on one hand, climate impacts are becoming worse every year, and the global south is facing the absolute brunt of that. But what do we prioritize in this extremely turbulent geopolitical environment? And how do we really keep that goal of climate action, climate reparations as a moral obligation? How do we keep that front and center when honestly everything is just upside down?
Right.
I think that's one of the many reasons why it's important to have this conversation. So in the coming months, we will discuss a whole range of topics linked to the politics of climate change. So we'll talk about multilateralism or the death of it. We'll talk about trade, finance. We'll talk about power and access to resources for the global south. We'll try to have some good conversations around green industrialization and also green growth and development for developing countries. Throughout all of this, our lens is going to be rooted in the Global South's best interests, which is something that CSE has done for 40 plus years. Absolutely. And honestly, it is just a privilege to carry on that legacy and conversation. So with that, we'll get into the conversation for today. Today, we'll be talking about multilateralism. It sounds like a very big abstract word, but our reflection today is really about multilateralism and its impact on climate action. Where are we going? Where is it headed? And what is really the way forward? So this month, Xi Jinping said multilateralism is the only choice for addressing global challenges. Last year, the basic group of countries in a proposal to the UNFCCC said that they are strongly committed to multilateralism and that the UNFCCC should consider concerns with unilateral and coercive climate change-related measures. So there seems to be this kind of awareness and growing anxiety that multilateralism is under threat. And it's really a question that we want to examine today. What does this mean for climate action? And is it good, bad? Probably not good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's an important question to ask whether the multilateral system is broken or is it changing, and what it was supposed to do for climate change, is that happening or not? And I think it wouldn't be appropriate to say that the multilateral system is really broken, but actually changing. And our demand from the UNFCCC over the years has gradually grown. We've been asking so much from the system, and then we really have to ask whether the system is, what are the limitations of the system, whether the system will be able to deliver on whatever demands we are placing on it. So I think we know climate change is a global problem, and it requires a global forum to coordinate the kind of ambition that is needed to ensure the fairness of the process and build trust across countries. And to some extent, UNFCCC has been very good in delivering on some of these issues. It is a representative space, and everyone gets a seat at this table.
Yeah.
So
one country, one vote, consensus-based decision making.
Right, exactly.
So in a way, the UNFCCC regime is one of the purest distillations of multilateralism.
Yeah.
In a sense, I mean, there's others. You have the WHO, the UNGA, the WTO.
Yeah.
Each with its own promises and pitfalls. But the UNFCCC is kind of this very romantic, idealistic kind of space for this.
And it's also the space that got the principle of common but differentiated responsibility established and gave legitimacy to the idea that the demand for equity should be there in climate action. And there are numerous, successes to count. You had Kyoto, you had Copenhagen, you had Paris, you had Glasgow, all milestones.
Yeah, like these are these like major marker moments that kind of got cohesively brought the world together in a sense. They were all problematic in different ways, but also they brought the world together at different moments to set these sort of like North Star targets.
Right.
You know, like these aspirational goals that can then distill down to the subnational level, to the private sector, and, for the world to kind of reorganize itself around.
Right. And it's also one of the rare agreements which kind of has made all these countries commit to some form of action. So it's substantial, and it has made space for accountability. There is ample space for dialogue, and there is space for putting pressure on the system. You get space for civil societies to to come in and sort of, have a voice in the whole process.
Yeah. I mean, the civil society access that the UNFCCC provides, I don't know any other space multilaterally that provides that.
Right.
The World Bank and IMF spring meetings are going on right now, and civil society is just on the outside. And the ability to influence the proceedings the way the UNFCCC offers, I mean, I think it's quite unparalleled.
Right. And it not just the process, it has also delivered on some of the key elements.
Yeah.
You got the Green Climate Fund created.
Yeah.
You got the Loss and Damage Fund created.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you also have the Global Goals on Adaptation being worked out.
Right.
So it has delivered on these kinds of elements.
Right. So two things. So one, there's been a lot, well, before I come to the two things, there's been a lot the UNFCCC has done right, but there has been a lot of anger and frustration with the UNFCCC, so that's first. The second is the world is shifting massively. So if I talk about the second point very quickly, we are seeing increasing fragmentation, domestic self-interest, non-alignment, and also this kind of focus on minilateral, bilateral groupings as opposed to the kind of, sanctity of the multilateral space that was there before. So I think that should lead us to really examine what has gone wrong within the UNFCCC space.
Yeah. I mean, you're right to point out that there might be some problem. Many of us are starting to see that there have been increasing conversation around whether UNFCCC has a limited role, or can it deliver on whatever we are asking of the process. And one of the key, if you can say it's a boon, but also might be a bane, is that it relies on trust.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it exists in a world of power imbalances. So we constantly see that being played out in the COP year after year.
Yeah, it's like we're all in this together, but are we really in this together? We're all starting from very different starting points.
Right.
And the field is not level at all, but we're supposed to come together as this like big family and agree on these big global goals. So it's a completely unequal, unlevel playing field.
Right. And when it comes to implementation, one of the big asks by the developing countries has been finance, and the process has been vague. And the process has been delayed on delivering finance. So this makes us look at some of the other multilateral systems that exist, and we have to ask.
Or, as I would point out, minilateral. Or plurilateral.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Right. Regional blocks or bilateral, groupings, regional groupings.
G20, BRICS, G7, regional trade arrangements.
Right. One of the advantages of these kinds of group may be that they are more focused on certain elements. They are more into delivering on certain key focused areas. But herein lies the challenge as well. These groups are more transactional in nature.
Yeah.
They unlike the UNFCCC, which is more trust and idealism
and principles.
Yeah. These kinds of groupings have a transactional relation. They're also quite exclusionary.
Yeah.
In the sense that this place certain conditionalities on countries that want to become a part of it.
Yeah.
And what happens to the countries that are not a part of this system?
Yeah. Also, what happens to principles like equity, common but differentiated responsibility in spaces like this?
Yeah, they really take a backseat in these places, because as these places are transactional, they don't really give a place to principles like equity or CBDR, which are very foundational to the climate justice movement.
One big conversation that has been coming up is, does the UNFCCC have the authority or mandate to facilitate implementation? You do your target setting and you do your announcements and launches at the UNFCCC, but does it really have the authority? Like a big sort of discussion from after Baku has been, was the UNFCCC really equipped to pass a huge finance disbursement where you have a meeting in Baku where you don't have finance ministries of most countries present on the ground? but you have negotiators and envoys who have been sent there to win this huge billion-dollar package.
Right.
And I mean, is it really equipped with that kind of authority? And I'm not coming at this from a cynical perspective to say that it doesn't have the authority, so we should look elsewhere. I'm very tragically questioning the fact that we didn't think about it not having that kind of authority.
Fair.
And perhaps should have built in mechanisms in this multilateral process to have that authority to make these big things happen,
Right.
and to actually move implementation on the ground. So the question going forward is, where does multilateralism for climate action go from here? Do we stay with the same structures and arrangements and agreements? Or do we do a serious inquiry into what is not working? And we're starting here from as CSC, we're starting from a baseline assumption: we need multilateral cooperation.
Right.
We need countries to work together. You can have your smaller, fragmented clubs and groupings and bilaterals, but you need a coordinated global effort to continue to tackle the climate problem, which is going to just get worse from here unless we make some serious changes.
Right.
So how do we take multilateralism forward to actually make it effective for climate action? So the first question, as you said, is on trust. The bonds of trust needed for multilateralism to be successful have been violated. And my reading of this is that two things have happened. The developed countries have not reduced emissions as much as they were supposed to or had committed to. Secondly, they have not provided the resources, be it money, be it technology, be it capacity, to actually help the global south make these changes.
Right. And they are also turning protectionist now.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, the assumption for a lot of this cooperation to work is a world with, I guess, fewer trade barriers. I don't know, that's not a statement I'm willing to make, but it is true that trade barriers are going up.
Yeah.
You have Donald Trump in the US, who's assaulting countries with massive tariffs. Most recently announced is something like 3,000+% of tariffs on the import of solar panels from Southeast Asia, which is directly attacking the heart of the green transition and the climate challenge. Other than tariffs, you also have measures like CBAM, which the European Union is instituting, which is essentially, we view it as a carbon tariff. So protectionist walls are going up. For an effective multilateral process to carry forward, you need representation of the most vulnerable, of the weakest countries. So from that perspective, I don't know.
I think the representation of the global south has been really kind of changing in the recent years. You have the BRICS expanding to include several other developing nations. Then you have the G20, which is also kind of composed of a mix of developed and developing countries.
And is also expanding. The African group of countries joined
African
the G20.
Group joined the G20. And there are questions about the World Bank, the representation of developing countries in the World Bank and the IMF. So you're right to say that the representation is an important element going forward.
And I think one more factor that's really important in my view is one of the failings of the current multilateral climate discussions has been a complete disconnect from what is happening domestically on transitions. The domestic context and reality quite divorced from the global discourse on climate, the global target setting. And I think that has been a very sore point. Many developing countries are actually doing more domestically on climate than they are going and committing or saying at the multilateral stage.
Right.
And the reasons for this are numerous. There's a ton of political baggage associated with, going and making loud proclamations at COP and places like that. There are reasons why developing countries are held back. But there has to be less of a top-down conversation that focuses purely on climate ambition and more of a cognizance of what are the domestic economic realities of so much of the global south. what is the domestic context that is either enabling or disabling a proper transition that these global targets are mandating? I think that's one of the big failings of the current system, which needs to be addressed. We have to also entertain the possibility that there is an emerging multipolarity, which I know there are people, thinkers out there who have different views on. Are we truly moving on from a unipolar and bipolar moment and moving to a multipolar world? Typically the multilateral climate conversation has always been this fight between the global north and the global south. And for many years now, that's been shifting as emission profiles have been shifting. But it's not just about emissions, it's also about shifting power centers. So from an emissions perspective, the developed country blocks like to always bring up, well, there's China's massive emissions today, Brazil is expanding oil and gas, India is using so much coal. That's the emissions profile. But if you go beyond the emissions question, the centers of power are also shifting. So be it new centers of manufacturing and production across Southeast Asia and parts of Africa, Latin America. You have new financial centers emerging in the Middle East, in East Asia, particularly China. So who is really dictating the terms for multilateralism in this new world? Personally, I think I would love to see more of the terms be dictated, shaped, and developed by the global south. Is that going to happen adequately, or are we still too tied to Western economies for finance, for trade, for all kinds of cooperation? So we keep ceding that ground. I think that's going to be an interesting question going forward. This very idealistic, romantic notion of 200 countries coming together, understanding one another's challenges, realities, recognizing their historical responsibility, and cooperating with one another to make climate action possible. This dream stays alive. It has to, because this was cemented in the UN Convention back in 1992. But it's coming under severe pressure today, where you're having so much of fragmentation and countries kind of looking to their own context, own interests, geopolitical alliances. I think this is going to be a real moment for perhaps new leadership to lead the way and keep this multilateral process alive. And I don't know, any final words?
I think yes, in an increasingly volatile world, in an increasingly changing world, it becomes important to understand how are we going to navigate this space, how are we going to see multilateralism going forward, and what would be the role of global south countries in this changing setup.
So that brings us to the end of our first episode. We have many more such far-ranging as well as extremely focused conversations in store, and hope you will join us this year and listen in. Thank you from CSC.